Kenshi, the blind swordsman of Mortal Kombat, with his legendary sword Shinto, passed down from generation to generation, the blade that took away his eyes, but made him more fierce than ever. First is Afro Samurai, the boy scarred by justice, the gunslinger, that took away his father, Roku right in front of him when he was a boy, making him become a lethal, killer, dynamic, splitting edge, soulless seeming samurai that goes on a path of vengeance stained by violence like no other. Two swordsmen that I've always been intrigued about, especially getting more spice of life with Afro Samurai, reading the manga, taking in a great case of likeness to him, and most importantly always being a Mortal Kombat fan, and Kenshi being one of my favorite characters from the series. In today's battle I'm going to be taking Kenshi from the case of the first timeline, aka midway era of games, power scaling that verse because he has better scaling. I think he's a smidge a better character. I don't like M1K, that's why obviously I didn't play it for y'all who were wondering about it in the case of matter for obviously my channel or speak about it in any form. This is because I don't have a new format of a consequence to speak about it, and that is a whole different story. But besides that, it's taking Afro Samurai versus the anime, taking in Resurrection, and considering all the cases of this game, but I'm most likely going to be doing Afro post the Afro Samurai anime, not the manga, not the game, and definitely not the movie, even though the movie considerably is a reasonable form of canon. But I'll talk about that at a different point, especially because some scaling from that will be needed. Regardless though, enough yap. Hope you guys will enjoy. Let's go and get it in. Kenshi, a born fighter. Kenshi wandered off from in search of a worthy competition. He would find an opponent and defeat them just to boost his pride. One day, Kenshi encountered a man named Song, who convinced Kenshi that a warrior needed a great sword. Song then led Kenshi to the location of an ancient, powerful sword Song claimed would befit Kenshi's power. As Kenshi unsealed the will within the sword supposedly lay, he was overwhelmed by souls trapped within and permanently blinded. Song revealed himself to be none other than the vile sorcerer Shang Tsung, and proceeded to absorb the released souls and left Kenshi to die within the tomb. However, the sword, which actually did exist, attracted Kenshi and spoke to him, leading him from the tomb and revealing its origin. The sword originally belonged to a long line of great swordsmen from whom Kenshi descended. The well where the sword lay was also the sacred resting place of the souls of Kenshi's ancestors, souls that were stolen by Shang Tsung. Kenshi spent the next decade or so retraining his senses, all while searching for his betrayer and the file of his ancestry. This path led him to the U.S. Special Forces. Kenshi's special abilities eventually caught the attention of Jax and Sonya Blade, who at the time were looking for members with special talents to join their side and venture into Outworld. Kenshi jumped at the chance to pursue the man who had deceived him. After going through many tests and examinations, he was accepted to join the Outer World Investigation Agency. Thank you to Street Fighter vs. Mortal Kombat Wiki for the case of the information about Kenshi. Obviously, if you guys have watched my videos before, for my technical fans, or for my case of YouTube career, or anyone watching, knows that most of the time I just wing it when it comes to information. I do a great deal of research to take in the character, be watching this, reading this, just getting a full spice understanding of the character to give the most concrete, consistent, and great view of the character to make sure obviously y'all know what's going on with them, with their character, or the case of their capabilities and power scaling. But generally, if I would write something or not, I would just full ad-lib it, full just make it up on the spot, or in this case just be my best in the case of actually representing the character to the best view and all that stuff. But besides all that, when it comes to more history and power scaling of the case of Kenshi, our great blind swordsman, Kenshi would fight with the case of defenders of Earthrealm as Earthrealmer himself within the fight to go ahead and put down the deadly alliance, which was an alliance between the vile sorcerer Shang Tsung and the evil sorcerer Quan Chi. He would not, in the case of Kenshi, get his vengeance on Shang Tsung because Raiden would kill him and Quan Chi in his sacrifice against Onaga in Mortal Kombat Deception. Peak intro, by the way. But would fight on the side of Earthrealm and still be a sly professional swordsman and great help within the case of the War of Light and Darkness and Armageddon when he fought on the case of side of Earthrealm and the side of Light, but unfortunately would be set up, mixed up, and stabbed by Quan Chi in the gut and killed during the Battle of Armageddon. But even with the case of his death and not having the most defined, I guess, repertoire of feats and stuff, there's still a great deal of stuff and character and essence brought to him, and this definitely is one of not my favorite version of Kenshi, even though from what I heard, in one case, Kenshi is not actually bad objectively. But regardless, though, Kenshi, as a combatant slash case of a fighter, is a very skilled combatant. He's a dynamic martial artist and swordsman, knowing multiple different forms of martial arts things, multiple forms of a way to kill people within different Shoten karate, create taekwondo, mix up in different form of samurai training, as his sword is a spirit sword that allows him, with the case of him fighting with echolocation like Daredevil, to have multi-rack of all traits, senses, a sixth sense like no other, being able to be splitting edge with the case of having the ability to do telekinesis, split his sword out, hover a person like he's using the force, hit him around, smack him around. His mind is arguably the most strongest form of mind in the telekinesis and intellectual property in the verse. He's very skilled. He was able to go and outdo and outskill multiple former combatants during the battle of Armageddon. He was able to go ahead and take out certain people here and there with a mix-upping, as he's the one who killed Shiva, who, even though not having the best track record of scaling, was said to be the strongest female Shokan within the Mortal Kombat verse. He was able again to stand evenly paw for paw and scale to Quan Chi in scaling and do pretty just alright, defined, skillful stuff, and is definitely one of the most skilled combatants within the Mortal Kombat verse. When it comes down to AP and durability, is obviously Newton's third law. What you dish out is what you should take. He would reasonably scale at the lowest end from the wall level to, I would give, a considerable strong essence of being reasonably low small building level, or at least getting to that level. As the reason why I say this, because again, he was able to fight all these different cases of different people that scale considerably in that regard, and or facing people that should scale above that, especially when you think about how Shiva is weaker than Goro, but because she was so famed for being the strongest female of her race, she would be considerably set in the matter to stand as, you know, very peak strong in comparison to his better echelon of feats, and reasonably Goro, of old timeline or not, should scale on the small building at a low end. So that would be making him reasonably vast, because he killed her, split her back up, splintered her body, all that stuff, and, you know, scaling to other people pretty fondly, and, you know, having all these capabilities of mind hacks, you know, telekinesis, gravitational hold like shit of the force, being able to have a sixth sense, different hacks, see wild card things, his capabilities that would give him great credit to be able to outdo and overpower people like that. So, you know, simply put, that's good. And also, I think in one of the cases of his moves, he actually throws a fucking boulder at a person, which obviously doesn't dish out more than a great wall level calc, but kind of just supports that statement. But that also would give him the same durability, because Newton's third law, like I said before. Now, speed is a very mixed thing. He would be reasonably on that superhuman because he's able to, you know, in gameplay, dodge arrows, different moves and attacks from different people. He reasonably should be like subsonic to be able to dodge and maneuver different cases of different things. But because in gameplay he has different deflect or parry-like moves, and some moves that you consider to be light or this and this and that are hit at him, and he can just deflect it or splice it back in this case, with the case of a concussive like move, depending on your perceived gameplay with actual lore to an extent. There's an argument on some Kenshi shit, right, when it comes down to how he actually would fight, and lore being whatever the hell, but how he fights in game would make him the most proficient, because obviously gameplay, Kenshi throughout his entire gaming career has always been A to S tier character to play. So there's an argument with that case of Kenshi, what he could actually do versus what gameplay would suggest, and mixed with also Genji timing, that he couldn't be as powerful and speed like for how he would want to be. So with that being said, depending on how you would argue it, he would arguably just be like a superhuman to, at best, subsonic. But if we use gameplay, he reasonably should be relativistic to even faster than light. So I would say a good like mid relativistic on the 40 to 60% speed of light to arguably faster, depending on how you perceive his movement to deflect and do this and do that. Okay, but even then, with that being said, if we equal the stats, that is something to be talked about at a different point, but that's just like, again, for an example. But besides that, time to talk about Afro Samurai. Afro Samurai, the greatest anti-hero to great character for me. One of the best black characters created, one of the most coolest anime characters in anime in general. Afro Samurai, when he was a boy, saw his father, at the time, the number one, Rokutaru, die, but the number two at the time, Justice. They held headbands. Headbands in the Afro Samurai world are pretty much artifacts to great essence of something more than life. Case of weapons to tools to representation of power. Rokutaru were the number one, and when you're the number one, you pretty much are God. You hold damn the omniscient sense of power. You get great power, eternal living, maybe even omnipotence of knowledge. But it is something that only a few men can truly wear to rep, in the case of the means, of a man that is most powerful because of the fact that he's just that person. Number two is a person that's destined or has the only case of right to kill the number one, and also lives through unfortunate insanity cycle of vengeance and violence considerably. As any member of the number two collection or other headbands, it's not just the number one and number two, shown in the case of at least Afro Samurai, the anime verse, because there's multiple headbands of multiple varieties, but at least the number one and number two are the only ones that actually truly matter in the collection of violence and insanity. In that case, right, in that sense, someone like Afro later on becoming the number two, and others have lived through a multiple form of crazed violence and terror to go ahead and become what they are or go against the people that they have now want to go and kill to become the number one or whatever because of the fact of that. And with this being said, Justice took out Rokutaru, Afro's father, to become rightfully number one, to make a world birthed through the matter of disorder and spores of violence. So in the end, all of it comes back to him to collectively gain power and become God where God has never sat upon, aka become something where God has failed, man to become God, and he would rule the case of this feudal to considerably futuristic version of Japan like a god, and he has been killing all the case of the headband users and wielders up to this point. Afro Samurai, character I've talked about multiple times before, has multiple accolades and capabilities within his entire case of career, but pretty much we're just going to be going over that as I've already made a whole how powerful is Afro Samurai and who is he like stuff, and I've made a whole Judge Amon video. I've talked about why he's my favorite anti-hero slash great character, why he's the god of that. So go watch all those videos, shameless plug, if you want to get a better split and spice of his character. But at the same time, I'm going to still be talking a little bit some of those things, but just more review and just repping of his capabilities is being said. Like I said, we're using post the Afro Samurai anime. In the anime, he's done multiple different feats to be in the credit of being the most peak, grade A legendary samurai, as he's wrecked multiple forms of mercenaries, ronin, thugs, ninjas, fought different bands of people. He was able with just a flick of a wrist after becoming a famed legend of terror and badassery as the Black Afro Samurai, being able to go and uncuff the case of his katana from his shaft and splinter a bullet from a great motorized flintlock and make it splinter people behind him and split the person that shot it without even the case of a thought. With this being said, this would reasonably make him a good mid-subsonic, if we say at the lowest end, but reasonably on the cusp of supersonic. But it gets way more faster from this over time. And with this being said, how he became number two was from killing the case of his sword master that knew his father and possibly Justice, with him going down the same cycle and road of crazed violence and bloodshed within the means to become the number two. It kind of sounds weird when I said that. Crazy violence. Just get me saying all this with a fucking water, man, over here talking like a fucking preaching them, but peak case characters and writing and power scaling. You already know what boy do, but it is what it is. Joke aside though, with that being said, He later on, with speed, was able to cut a literal RPG rocket head in half, or at least the case of the cusp for shooting at him, has been able to go ahead and deflect and split bullets from Justice and move so fast the bullets are seen in slow motion. And Justice against Rakutaru was wielding just general form flintlocks, but now wields shotgun barrel case of flintlocks, aka some Desert Eagle ass flintlocks. And this takes place considerably in a feudal Japan setting, and this man is wielding westernized form guns and shit. So that easily makes Afro deliberately a supersonic to supersonic plus case of individual. But when he fights a robotic clone of himself, aka version, an Afrobot, and is able to master Ultra Instinct this motherfucker, outdo him sword style, when he was literally designed to recognize and know every sense of how this man Afro would fight and capabilities of that such. He was able to go ahead and kill him when he was just looking like a fucking rendition of him, and when he fully went all out cyborg style with rockets, different gun plicks, and different shower shit. And in between this, especially within the matter of Resurrection, which is an Afro who's older, rusty, and not as powerful because of multiple things I'm going to explain, this would make him considerably, depending on how you perceive, just dodging and deflecting different cases of these blows with his katana mid-air, by the way, be reasonably low slash sub relativistic to reasonably mid, as this would be 10 to 20% the speed of light, and he deliberately deflects a laser later on, with this being said, and also just be a whole different built person, sorry that's my phone, and be able to style out on this motherfucker Afrobot. With this being said, and make any person that he's scaling to in sword clashes or moving around and having actually a tussle with scale in that regard as well. And he does this in Resurrection, which I'll get more to. After defeating Afrobot, moving through the Empty Seven, he goes on to Justice and takes him out, who was the number one that had supernatural powers, a healing factor, and had a third arm hidden in his back with a big ass Nodachi katana. But he was able to defeat him through the mix of having a cartoonishly goofy ass afro, the comb of his lost lover, and considerably the fact that Afro is just built different, as his afro allows him to pull a hack to build it pretty much depending on what happens to his afro will always stay intact, or pretty much be a shield or like cover or regenerative like stocky thing of that. His afro is so big, bullets can go through it and it doesn't matter. Arrows or even spears can go through it, doesn't matter. A katana can go through it, and unless they are stronger than him in that regard, or he gets hit by something way more stronger than whatever goes for his afro before, means that he would be able to be fine. So his afro is more durable than spears, any other form of that. And with that being said, with his AP and durability, he's able to cut for full raw metal, different bullets for different weapons, able to go ahead and dish out as much more damage as he could possibly do to a robot that's able to survive a crashing fall into a building and be able to survive bombards of different shit, be slammed against stuff, survive the aftermath, half case of explosion from a rocket, which would easily make him at a low to small building level, right? Because he already is up form from wall level to reasonably, to me, I would say is more in little credit of small building to even plus, just on a bare minimum, as he was poisoned and took half of a great deal of damage of a fucking rocket launcher and did need to be patched up, and he was knocked out from this, but arguably the poison was already going to do that, and he again was just not objectively ready for everything that was coming to him. But regardless though, Afro showcases great case of skill with his katana, as his katana is like the case of the katana of Kenshi from For Honor. A great long Nodachi as blade, skilled martial artist, skilled combatant with it, and multiple times has proved himself to be the man of the hour every time he's repping this blade. So great case of scaling, consistency all around with that being said. But as well with that, he is just a great fierce warrior and not to be trifled with. For the scaling that he is above at the end of Afro Samurai is obviously taking out Justice, and then after a long time, as is not showcased, as the timeline of Afro Samurai is objectively fucked, he was able to go ahead and patch up the case of his body after getting gunshots pierced through his body, and being able to go ahead and make way with the capability to be able to defeat his friend who's empowered with all case of headbands, and be able to defeat him in a clash, severely injuring him to killing him, as it was said that by Ninja, who's a good source as being a mixed bar of either a whole avatar for the number 2 headband wielder, or being a split subconscious of Afro's mind, like a parody of what Afro could have been if he wasn't, turned into a stone cold killer. This, would easily go about making him be one of the most defined sources of knowledge about the case of the world. Afro was able to go ahead and defeat someone that wielded all headbands like Justice and just kill him considerably in a one-off clash. Afro and Afro Samurai Resurrection takes place years later, where Afro is rusty, not as much in the mind to be a killer and just be slapping motherfuckers into next week, slapping them into God, and pretty much is just a guy not on the full front understanding for how to do what he used to do so goodly in the past. So with that being said, Afro would not obviously be at his most peak, even if he has a great deal of feats in there. But also because he didn't have the number 1, as it got jacked to him in his own home by his ex-surrogate brother and considerably sister, Siho, and the headband was taken from him. With that being said, headbands in this world seem to do give some sense of power and are not just symbolic things. They are very symbolic, but they also do dish out power. How much power they dish out is a whole nother case of story, but the power that they bring out is a multitude of different things, and the power all around that they hold is very mixed on the wielder. The number 2 headband wielder, to me, I perceive, is a person that gets amped in their general physical capabilities, instinct, strength, stamina, endurance, stuff like that, which considerably go hand in hand, and even considerably durability. But for all these things and different capabilities that holds, is all in one's own considerable credit of strength, as the case of the wielder of this or this, is very mixed in all odds of actually holding something of that great resource. So to me, that is what makes them, hold that in full effect. And with that being said, the number 1 is obviously got an amp to the most fullest and reckons anything and everything that makes whoever the number 2 or whoever is pretty much, obsolete depending on the case. But with that being said as well, that also makes the case of whoever has all the headbands dang near that same, just not the number 1. Afro, with just the number 1 headband, was able to defeat someone that had every single headband in existence at that time. And so with that being said, that right there made easily the case of that person that took a person out with all these headbands, the most cracked out powerful person of the time. And Afro and Afro Samurai Resurrection doesn't scale to any of those things because of the fact that he didn't have it and also is rusty. It's also the fact that, simply put, Afro at this time is not on the same case of, morale or any essence of that. He's just, not in the game the same. So he, simply put, would be a lower form scale of any of that stuff to come, because again, he doesn't scale to any of that stuff. So that's where the split difference is in comparison. So with that being said, that is the reason why he would be scaling so much more higher in some form, because again, he scales so much more demonstrably different because he's just not built the same. So that is the reason why, he's built like that, and why obviously in the case of his prime, aka post, all that stuff is the reason why. And obviously everything that he's done in Afro Samurai Erection, scaling the Shurako, scaling against the case of his 3 musketeer opposition, or anything of that sort, is still, a valuable thing. But also as well mean that he would continuously defy all odds put against him if he was in his prime facing those things, arguably. With this being said, his prime would be like maybe a 30 to 40 case H split difference, but it's kind of mixed, But regardless though, when it comes down to how this fight would go, if it isn't obvious, it's considerably close depending on how you see it. with Afro being, I would say, way more skilled, having a better rack of all trades of scaling and feats to be presented in the overarching case of scaling chain and different things like that, that right there would make ultimately the case of the change in scaling so predominantly different and heck of a wild case thing to possibly try to fight in Afro's defense, to where it pretty much make any person in that regard dang near obsolete. And so, in conclusion, right, that is where the overarching chain is for the case of the scaling at hand. And yeah, that's pretty much, you know, where it ends when it comes down to the fight. Just the simply fact of scaling being more in someone else's favor, but as well with the fact that Afro, even if we equaled the stats, because considerably the speed scaling, I would say, goes more in the credit of Afro because it's more consistent, it's more reliable, as Kenshi's scaling from gameplay is very mixed, and it wouldn't really make him that much more faster. It would actually just make him be on par to even considerably slightly less as fast or faster than Afro, because Afro again is able to deflect the laser in actual case of real time, scan to different arguable laser shots by different characters, so that would make him, you know, reasonably mid to high relativity, just fast and light, while Kenshi is not. But if we equal the stats and said that they're both on the same cusp of AP, durability, and speed, then I think Kenshi maybe does have a way, as Afro has never faced somebody with the telekinesis that Kenshi has, and there's a lot of capabilities for this man Kenshi to take Afro out with just a force pull. But there's an argument that Kenshi doesn't just fight instantly with just killing and doing that instantaneously. So to have a mixed case sword battle, Afro is more fierce skill and better shine of different stuff in comparison will really get on Kenshi, but Kenshi eventually, because of his mixed hacks and different arguably stack into people that is like a mix bar to say more stronger than Afro, because Afro has a more consistent stand to say that he's actually from a consistent standpoint small building to plus and not just low small building like someone like Kenshi would considerably be. To me, that is where the difference is. So if you equal the stats, then Kenshi has a chance to win. I would bet on Afro most of the time with no bias, because simply put, he has a better skill regimen, he has better scaling in this case version of Kenshi, and arguably Kenshi in general, and he just has a better run around of speed scaling that would put him on a whole better bar none in comparison. So to me, that is where the battle really ends in comparison, especially taking in the fact that Afro would double on everything the headband has to offer, and that, you know, this man Kenshi could never outdo, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. One of my longer ones allows us to go about in bigger form talking about and scaling chain, and you know, it was very good. Let me know who you guys think will win though. Very interesting one. Love y'all. Appreciate you guys and the support and love for the run of the videos I've been putting out. Love y'all. Peace out, Muhammad. Be safe.